This is the oral history project from the Mountain School. Lydia Jenks, Sam Donahue, Mark Leonard, and Jonathan Resinger are interviewing Ralph Coleman. Today is April 20th, 2001.
Where were you born?
I was born in Brattleboro, Vermont
When?
in 1948.
Can you tell us about your birth?
No, I don't remember much about my birth, but
Or where you were born?
I was, as I say, I
Hospital.
lived right here at this farm, but I was born in the Brattleboro Hospital in May of 1948, and then came right back here and lived most of my life right here at the farm ever since.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I've got 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
What are their names?
Nelson and Harold are my brothers, and Susan and Patricia are my sisters.
What are your parents' names?
My parents' names were Lawrence and Dorothy Coleman.
How old were they when you were born?
They were 25 and 24, I believe.
How close are you and your siblings?
We've always been pretty close. I've got one sister moved away to Maine. She's has a family up there, and then my other sister is lives just down the road, so we see her a lot. And then my other 2 brothers and myself are in partnership here at the on the dairy and lumber operation.
Did you fight when you were children?
Oh, of course. You're not normal if you don't fight with your siblings a little bit.
Did you ever travel outside of Vermont?
Yes, very little as a child, but when I went into the Army right after graduating from college, and did my service in Oklahoma and Texas, so spent some time out there.
What war were you in?
Wasn't in the war. It was during the Vietnam War period, but I never was asked or told to go to Vietnam. It didn't break my heart too badly. But
Did you choose to go into the Army?
yes, I did. I went through the ROTC program at University of Vermont, where I was going to school, and so I went in as a lieutenant, and then did my tour in both Oklahoma and Texas.
What college did you go to?
University of Vermont in Burlington.
How was Oklahoma and Texas different from here?
Very a lot drier, a lot hotter, and a lot flatter.
What was it like for the people? Were they less friendly?
No, I think the people were a lot like here. That was a nice thing about being in both college, but in the service especially, you got to meet all kinds of people from all walks of life. And right here in Rawsonville, Vermont, you don't see many black people or Hispanic people and that kind of thing. So we got a real education as to a big diversity of people in that, which was really good for me, I think for anybody that comes from this part of the country.
So did you like it here more or there?
Oh, I think I like it here more, but there's an awful lot of the country that is probably just as beautiful or as here. It's just probably more where you grow up and get used to.
Why did you decide to stay in Vermont?
I think mainly just that I had grown up on the dairy farm here, and decided after I had seen some of the rest of the country that I wanted to come back. My dad was still alive at that time, and so I started farming with him, and then both of my younger brothers decided to come back, and then we formed a partnership and have stayed here since then.
Did you ever decide, think about moving somewhere else to do your farm?
No, not really. I did move away in between. Actually, after I was farming with my brothers, we decided in '83 we moved away for a couple of years and moved to just like 100 miles from here up in mid-state Vermont, and I actually worked in a hardware store for a couple of years. So that was a good experience to kind of get me away, and then I came back to the farm after that.
How'd you heat your house?
With wood, mostly. We have got an oil backup, but I heat most of it with wood.
Was it cold in the morning?
Not somewhat, but like I say, with an oil backup, the oil comes on and takes over, and so it's not dependent entirely on the wood.
When you were little, whose job was it to keep the fire going?
Probably mostly my dad's at that time.
Did you cook on a wood stove?
Yes, my mom cooked on a wood stove basically all the time that she lived here, and even we have a wood cook stove in the house that I live in now, but we don't use it as a cook stove much. We use it more as heat.
Did you have hot and cold running water?
Yes, we did.
Did you have an outhouse?
No, never had to use. There was an outhouse in this old farmhouse, but we also had we had indoor plumbing at that point, and I run a camp now where the only facility is an outhouse, and we get quite a. It's interesting that it really separates the motel people from the campers. I'm basically filled every weekend, but there's definitely a difference in the people that want to stay either at a motel or at the rafters, we call it. It's a camp, but that is strictly outhouses.
Did you have a washing machine?
Yes, we did.
What time did you get up in the morning?
Well, that varied. Probably mostly 6 to 7 o'clock, especially when I was going, when I was going to school.
Right.
When I got a little older and decided to get up and help milk with my dad, then probably it was more like 5 o'clock in the morning.
What time did you go to bed?
I would guess sometime between 9 and 10, mostly.
Which chores did you have?
Well, with living on a farm, there were lots and lots of chores. I mean, you always had wood to bring in and fill the wood box, and then there were the chores at the barn, feeding calves, cleaning out. So there were many varied chores.
Did everybody help?
Yes, everybody did. Yeah.
Did you visit your relatives?
Yes, yeah, that was probably one of the few things that we did a lot as far as traveling on the weekends or something like that, was to go and visit cousins and grandpa and grandma and that type of thing.
Did they live far away?
No, most of them were within a
Sure.
20-mile radius or so.
What did you and your family have for pets?
We had most of the time a dog and a cat.
Did you have any unusual pets for
No, I guess we didn't. I think once as a kid we had a rabbit, and other than that, I don't think we did have much other pets.
Was anybody in your family famous?
I don't believe so, really, no.
What was the most impressive event that ever happened in your family?
Oh, that's I guess as far as history goes, and I wasn't around at that time to know, but they say that a relative of mine, like either a great uncle or grandfather, decided to, he was actually, I think, on a sleigh out on the bridge in Bonneville, way back probably the turn of the century before, and was killed by the sleigh going over into the river or something like that. So that's probably fairly momentous
Right.
part of history, but I don't know all that much about that.
What was the most difficult event that happened to you?
The most difficult event? Probably when I had moved away from the farm, like I say, in 1983, and then my dad, in 1985, my dad was killed. He was actually vacationing on his way to Florida and got killed by a speeding motorist in Georgia. And at that time, we had to make a big decision whether to uproot our kids who were all in school in Royalton and come back here and help my brothers run the farm. And that probably was one of the most difficult things I've ever done as far as make that decision.
What was your favorite childhood memory?
I guess I don't know if I really have a favorite, but I enjoyed I enjoyed the outdoors tremendously, and loved to hike with the. I was in the Boy Scouts when I was young, and we actually hiked the length of the long trail in 5 different sessions in the summer. Like we took a week off in the summer and hiked with the, and that was a pretty favorite thing to do, I think, at that point.
How long did you hike for?
We went for about 50 miles each summer, and that way, by doing it 5 years, we got the end of the long trail.
Right.
I want to do it again now when I'm this age, and maybe not in 5 years, but sometime I'll do it again.
What did you do on the weekends?
Well, weekends on the farm are much the same as weekdays as far as the chores have to be done and the cows have to be milked, and so Saturday wasn't much different from any day in most cases. Then Sunday we usually just did the milking and cleaned out the barns, and that was it, and took the rest of the day off, and sometimes went to church or sometimes went to visit relatives or just relaxed and did some things that we wanted to do. So that was really there was a little difference on the weekends.
What did you do for fun?
Well, we had many activities like skiing and skating and sliding, and I, as a pretty young, about the time I became a freshman in high school, I took up running. Ran for the cross-country team at the high school, and that's something that stuck with me ever since, because I still run races today even, so that's stuck with me.
What was your favorite game?
Probably horseshoes and croquet. I liked badminton also. Any good outdoor game.
What kind of toys did you have to play with your brothers?
Well, we used to play some baseball, and like I say, we threw horseshoes some. Had a badminton net. Frisbee. We used to throw frisbee as a child, and then ride bicycles and the kind of things that kids normally do.
What was your favorite time of the year growing up?
Probably fall. I enjoy the fall of the year. I like winter a lot too, but fall is always it's so dry usually. The bugs aren't biting at that point, and just fall is a real beautiful and probably one of my favorite times of year.
What is the most exciting thing that happened to you as a teenager?
As a teenager, well, it's hard to think right off quick, but I guess maybe, like I say, I joined the cross-country team at Leland and Gray, and that was something that was very special to me. I got to be the top runner on the at the high school level, and then I went on to University of Vermont, and didn't really even expect to make the team there, and I was actually the top runner on the freshman team at University of Vermont. So that probably was one of my favorite things that I did.
How many generations of your family have lived in Vermont?
I'm going to say at least 4 and maybe 5. My great grandfather, I guess, moved down from the place above us, the next place up on the hill, and came down here and settled sometime around 1860. And so that would be, if it was great-grandfather, grandfather, father, myself, and then our kids. So that would be the 5th generation, at least, that have been in, and it may be the 6th that actually has been here in Vermont. I'm not sure when they moved up. They came from down in Massachusetts somewhere, originally from there to here.
Do you know where your ancestors came from?
Well, I know Massachusetts, and before that, probably over in Europe, either England, Scotland, that area. But yeah, some of that's been traced fairly well, and I'm not real up on it, but I think that's where they.
How many generations of your family have been farming in Vermont?
Okay, that's like I say, we know that the farm here started sometime around 1870 or 80, I think, by my great grandfather. So 120 or 30 years.
How did If you could change something about how you grew up, what would it be?
I don't really have, I guess I don't really have anything that I can think of too much that I would change. Sometimes I wonder if I should have got married quite so early as I did, but I probably, if I look back, I probably wouldn't change that either.
We're gonna move on to school.
Okay.
Could you tell us about your schools?
I spent most of all my grade school years in the Rawsonville Schoolhouse, which is right down here at the junction of 30 and 100, right behind the R&D Mobile.
Right.
And I started there in the, let me see, probably 54, I guess. And I was the only one. It was a one-room schoolhouse for 8 grades, and I was the only one in the first grade. And so the teacher just put me right through Dick and Jane to begin with, and then I was kind of moving at my own pace, so I moved right through the next series of books. And so the next year, she put me in with the 3rd grade, which instead of the 2nd grade, because I would have still been the only one. And so from then on, I was a year ahead. I really can't say as I skipped a year, because I did the work, but it just at my pace. And so from then on, I was always a year younger than the rest of my people in my class, because she had moved me ahead. So I went the 6 years at that school, and then at that point they decided that Rawsonville School was too small to continue, and in 1960 they closed it down and sent the kids that were going to Rawsonville School down to the big, at that time we thought, a big school in Jamaica, and that's where I finished my grade school years at the Jamaica Village School. And then I went on to Leland and Gray and went there for 4 years, and then on to University of Vermont in Burlington, which was, of course, a big step to travel 110 miles to go to Burlington, Vermont, and finished up my college career in Burlington.
How many kids were in your high school classes?
We had about 40 in my high school class.
What do you do at your schools for recess?
Well, in grade school, back in those days, you'd find anything that you could pick up and play a quick game of softball or team tag or anything that you could do quickly like that, especially at lunch recess where you had like an hour. There was places that we could actually play a game of ball or run up into the woods and play games. And then when it got to be later on in high school, there wasn't really recess, but of course there's always activities, sports and those kind of things that we did in high school.
How did you get to school?
In Rawsonville, when I was little, we had to walk the mile to Rawsonville School, and then as soon as we went to Jamaica, there was a bus that picked us up, and the same at the high school in Townsend.
Right.
Was school ever closed because of bad weather?
Once in a while, but in those days, not very often. Most always the buses ran and unless it was a real big storm, and so most of the time we didn't cancel.
What were your teachers like?
My teachers? Well, I remember I think I had 3 different ladies who were my grade school teachers, and I think I sort of liked all of them. They were strict, but they made you learn, and they had to be real good organizers because they had 8 different grades that they were trying to teach, and in those cases the 8th and 7th and 8th graders sometimes had to help the younger kids out with a lesson because there just wasn't enough one teacher to go around, and so it was a kind of a sharing thing. She taught the big kids, and the big kids would help out with some of the lessons of the small ones, but it was a good experience. They were good teachers.
Did you have to buy your school books?
No.
Did you have a lot of homework?
I don't think an awful lot, but we always, as it got up into high school, of course, there was more homework. I don't really remember much in grade school. I think mostly we got that done in school.
What school holidays did you celebrate?
I think mainly the same as we do now. We had a spring and a winter recess, and a Christmas break of about a week and a half or two, and then the summer break. So I think it was about the same vacations. And
Did you have Thanksgiving off?
yes, we had Thanksgiving and like the next day off, so you always had that break.
Did most people go to high school?
In those, yes, in my day, most everybody did. Once in a while, there would be somebody that just either took an extra year or two in grade school and then decided at 15 or 16 they didn't want to go on to high school. But I would say at least 90% went on to high school.
What about college?
I think probably at that point it dropped back to more like 40 or 50% that decided to go on to college. There were, in my day, there was the going into the armed forces was definitely an option, and then quite a lot of people just got through high school and they went to work right here in the valley. So there were 2 or 3 different options, and not as many kids went. Probably not as many went to college as do today.
Okay, we're on to community life. When did your town, were you born with electricity?
Yes, when I was born, there was electricity here. They got electricity 2 years before I was born, I believe, here on the hill. I think my dad said that in 1943 they actually got milking machines to milk the cows, but they had to run it with a gasoline engine. And then in 1946, I think electricity came here, which was a lot later than, say, somewhere like Townsend or Brattleboro, where it took a long time to get the poles up and get the money to actually put it up on this, like on the back roads around here.
How many families were living in your town?
How many families? I would guess, it's hard to say in the whole town of Jamaica. Rawsonville, where we actually live here, is a little village in the town of Jamaica, and I would guess maybe 200 to 300 families, maybe, in the total town.
Wow.
I know the population now, I think they say is 1,000 something in Jamaica, so that's a rough guess.
How close were your neighbors?
Well, we had right here on the hill. We didn't have many year-round neighbors. We had a couple of different people that would actually come for the summer. So I guess real full-time neighbors were probably a half mile to a mile away.
How did you get around town in the area?
Well, most everybody had automobiles at that time, and then of course as soon as we could ride a bike, we rode a bike around, and if you really wanted to, you could always hike most anywhere to do things right here in the close neighborhood.
Could you tell us about your first car?
Yes, I guess my first car was my dad had found out that a friend of ours sold Ford cars down in Connecticut, and he happened to find a Ford convertible Mustang that was just like a year old, and got that, and we thought that was pretty special. And we did keep it for many years. In fact, even had it restored, and finally sold it to someone who then really restored it and put it like to drive in parades. But it was, I think Mustangs came out in '64, and this was a '65 or '6, so it was almost a new Mustang, and that they were very popular about in the mid to late '60s.
What were your clothes like when you were growing up?
Not a lot different than today. Probably, I guess the main difference is that in those days, clothes really, if you weren't, say, middle to high income, you were very careful of your clothes, and your mother usually patched your dungarees or maybe sewed up socks, and much more than we do today, where we feel that we can just throw away a pair of socks because you really can't afford or can't take the time to do that. And so I don't think the clothes were that much different than today, but we definitely took better care of them and so that we wouldn't have to go out and buy new ones.
So they had to last you.
Yeah.
Were there as many divorces as there are now?
That's a good question. I think there were quite a lot, and maybe more than I really realized at that time as growing up. But I don't really know that for sure, whether there were more or less.
Was it harder to get a divorce back then?
That I don't know either.
Did you ever meet anybody famous?
I'm trying to think if I ever. I guess not that I can think of.
What kind of medical services did you have growing up?
Well, there was just about as I was born, uh, Grace Cottage Hospital came into being down in Townsend, but it was not. I was born just too early to be able to be born there. I think the first kids were born in 1949, and I was born in 48. So that I think my doctor was Dr. Otis, who was the one that actually founded the Grace Cottage Hospital. But I had to be born in Brattleboro because there wasn't a hospital yet in Townsend. But there wasn't any Mountain Valley Medical Clinic in Londonderry, and there weren't the rescue services and stuff like there is today. So it was mostly a hospital, and you had to get there. You wouldn't be seeing a rescue ambulance come to your door like we have the great service today.
What kind of what was your role model when you were a child?
I guess probably mainly my role models would have been maybe my parents, and then older kids who I looked up to that were good in sports and good students, and kind of lived the way I thought kids could live at that time.
Yeah.
I didn't have older. I was the oldest in my family, so I had to have other kids that I looked up to, I guess.
Do you remember the flood of what's changed the most in your community?
Oh, I think probably now just the tremendous computer age has just changed everything. You can communicate so fast now, and within just a matter of minutes be in touch with most anything you want as far as I mean, we wanted to look anything up, we either had to own and set encyclopedias or go to a library or to the school, and now you can punch a few buttons on your computer and have the basically the world at your fingertips. So that, and then air and space travel has changed tremendously. I mean, there were airplanes back then for sure, but everything has changed tremendously. The speed with which people travel, and the amount of travel there is today.
Did your community lose a closeness, like the people?
No, I don't think so. I think especially right here in Rawsonville and Jamaica, there's a real good community, closeness and spirit still.
What do you wish hadn't changed?
Oh, I think sometimes that, like I say, the speed with which we can gain knowledge and the speed that we can go around is too fast sometimes. I think sometimes that we need to slow down and, like they say, stop and smell the roses. Sometimes we get too carried away with never always say, I just don't have time for that. And sometimes you've got to say, yes, we do have time, and spend more time with either your family or do some things that you really want to do to just relax and not always be caught up with the busy thing of life.
How old were you when you started dating?
I hate to even admit about. I think I was about 13 or 14. I don't know. I actually married the girl who I think I started running. Like I say, I was a freshman in high school and started running around the common at Leland and Gray, and she was an 8th grader at the Townsend School, and she said at that point she picked me out and said, that's the guy I'm going to marry. And I don't know how that ever happened, but it did. And she wasn't the only one I dated. I actually had other girlfriends too, but I did end up marrying my high school sweetheart, I guess you could say.
What kind of things did you do on dates?
Oh, you used to go to the bowling. Once in a while, go out to eat. I can still remember going to what is, I guess it's Bickford's now in Brattleboro, and it used to be the Howard Johnsons, and that was a huge trip to be able to get your dad's car and to take a girl to Brattleboro and take her out. And then, like they say, the movies were a big thing. Drive-ins were a big thing back when I was going to school. If you could convince your parents that they would trust you enough to take a girl to the drive-in. But that was a great thing because you drove in and hooked a microphone thing up. Have you ever been to a drive-in?
Yeah.
Know what are there?
I
And
think so.
you drive in and there's this huge screen way up ahead of you, and then a microphone thing that hangs on the window, and so you listen to it in your car and watch it up on the big screen with all the rest of the people. And that was pretty exciting back when we were kids.
How old were you when you got married?
I was about a week before my 20th birthday. I was just 19.
What was the ceremony like?
We actually got married at the Chapel of the Snow up on Stratton. And I like to tell people now that when we got married there, Stratton had opened in 1960 or 61, and we got married in 68, and all there was a base lodge, the Chapel of the Snows, lift line lodge, and maybe Birkenhaus or something, and that was it. And it was, believe me, it was beautiful. The mountain loomed up there, and you could see it. And now there are parking garages and these fancy and it's not pretty at all compared to what it was in 1968. But so that's where, and we actually had a Catholic. My wife was Catholic, and we had a Catholic service up at the Chapel of Snows in May of '68.
We're gonna move on to farming. Was life on the farm difficult?
Oh, I guess it was. I mean, it was a lot of hard work. Farming, if you do it right, is always a lot of hard work. But it also gives anybody that's involved with farming a tremendous sense of pride and family to do things together and do them right, as far as treat animals right and make good hay and make good maple syrup and that kind of thing. So it was difficult, but yet rewarding and a very good experience for anybody that wants to put up with that kind of thing. It's not for everybody.
Did your family have hired hands, or did just you guys do it?
Mostly family, but especially when we were too young growing up, my dad used to hire some older boys to help throw hay in the summertime, and we even hired sugar help once in a while in the spring. So we did off and on hire some extra people, and then once we got up into teenage years and stuff, there was usually enough help at that point.
What machine? Go ahead.
What machines have been invented since you grew up for farming?
Well, like I said, just before I was born, the milking machine came into existence, and before that it was all usually the farmer hopefully had 2 or 3 sons that could go out and they milked 6 or 7 cows, and many times they milked those cows before they went to school, so they'd go out and milk 6 or 7 cows by hand like this, and then they would change their clothes probably, maybe some of them didn't, but anyway, and go to school. So about middle of 1940s here, they got milking machines so that you could actually milk, one or two people could probably do what 4 or 5 used to do in milking. And then right about that time too was the time when tractors really, not that they had been invented long before that, but tractors really kind of took over the horse as far as the machinery to pull implements. And so right about that time we started to get 1, 2, or 3 tractors, and then the technology really took off after that in the late 50s and the 60s as far as equipment to make and dry hay. We went from pull behind hay conditioners, and then they decided to come out with a machine that would actually mow it and crimp it at the same time, and then fancy, more much higher technology balers, and those came out, and then in just the last few years we've gone to a system where we actually put a lot of our hay up in those round bales and wrap them like we've got out here. And so that really changes the technology, and it also changes the speed with which people can put up good quality hay, because you only have to dry that about half the time.
What was milking like?
Well, when I was young, we had an upstairs, what we call an upstairs stable, an old, it's in the barn that we've got down here right now. But we milked about 20 cows, and the manure, you opened a scuttle, and the manure actually went down underneath, and then it was taken out in the spring, like about this time of year, would taken out. And about the year that I graduated from college in 1965, my dad just found out he just was going to have to maybe move out of this upstairs. He needed more cows, and then he was going to have to change over to something. So he decided at that point in that summer we built the whole big freestall barn that you see, the one that is down there, the big red barn, and moved downstairs and about doubled the size of our herd and went to milk in a what they call a milking parlor. And the milking parlor is where the man stays where he is and the cows come to him. And now we can show you that here in a little bit if you want to see it. Some of you have probably seen it anyway, but we now milk 4 cows on a side. 4 come in and you get them grained and milk them, and then 4 come in on the other side. And the real state-of-the-art technology now is huge milking parlors where a man actually may put the machines on the cows, but everything else is almost done automatically. They are many times prepped automatically. They're automatic takeoffs so that the man doesn't even have to take the machines off. And in some cases, one man will handle 16 cows or so at a time in a fancy milking parlor. So that milking technology has really changed.
How many cows do you have?
We milk about anywhere from 35 to 45 most of the year around, and we have another 35 to 40 young stock growing up to replace those. So about a herd of 75 to 80.
Do you ever slaughter them for meat?
Excuse me. Yes, once in a while. We either once a year or twice a year, we normally do butcher 1 cow and then a couple of pigs for meat for our own families.
Right.
Do you make dairy products?
No, the only thing we do here is just sell our milk raw, just as it comes out of the cow and it goes into the bulk tank and is cooled, and it goes right from there. We've never tried to make butter or cheese. I've got a good friend that makes cheese now over in Londonderry, but we don't. We've never tried that.
Do you sterilize it here?
No, it is not. We try to, everything that we milk with is all cleaned and sterilized, but there's no sterilization process as far as heating it up. It just goes right, it's just considered raw milk when it leaves here.
What kind of plow do you use to plow your fields?
We don't ever plow our fields here. All we do is add, fertilizer and manure, and just continue to grow crops that way. I know my dad had told me that he never, in his lifetime, he never seen any land turned here. Basically because the land is like this, up and down hilly, and wet places and very rocky. If you look around here, you can see all those stones that built those stone walls, and believe me, they're not the only ones that are there. There's plenty more where they came from, and so we just don't plow. The only thing we plow is a garden, and even today we don't do that much. We use a rototiller instead. So.
What crops do you grow in your garden, or?
Well, in the garden we just the regular vegetable crops, and as far as the farm goes, the only thing we grow is just grass hay. Really, we don't try to grow corn here because it's a short growing season, and like I say, we'd have to do the plowing thing, and so we just farm just grass hay. And
Do you have any animals besides cows?
about the only thing we do is raise, like I say, we raise a couple of pigs in the spring up through the summer, and then slaughter them for food. And my brother has actually got a little flock of chickens for his own family, but we don't have chickens here on the farm.
Do you use horses?
No. About the last horses that were here were probably when I was about 10 years old at the most, and we had a team of horses that we would use. The only time was to use them in sugaring, when they'd haul around the sap tank, and finally one of them broke her leg, and so that was the end of the horse team. It just wasn't worth trying to keep a team around the whole year just to use for a few weeks in sugaring.
And I use tractors, right?
All tractors, right.
Did you share machines with your neighbors or tools?
Yes, to some extent. My dad had a brother who, in the early years, they used to hay together and kind of shared machinery that way. And then later on, he bought his own farm, and so we didn't do that much. But we do to some extent. We share machinery.
What was your daily routine?
When I was younger or now, you mean?
Younger.
Okay. When I was growing up, it was we weren't really asked to do too much in the farm as long as school was going on. But on our vacations in the summer, we would when I got to be a teenager, I would get up in the morning and help my dad milk and do chores, and then most all summer we were taken up with haying and that kind of thing. So you spent a good part of your summer just filling the barns with hay for the winter.
What's your daily routine? What's your daily
We just asked that.
routine
Now?
like now?
Okay, now it's a lot the same, but it has changed somewhat because there's 3 brothers that run the partnership here, and so we switch off. We only have to milk the cows a third of the time. There's only one of us gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning and milks the cows, and we've got 2 days off, and which is very nice because 4 o'clock gets very old after a while. And then we built this sawmill that we're sitting in 1975 to kind of add. When my 3rd brother came back to join the partnership, it was nice to have something else to keep us busy in the times when things were a little slack, and especially the spring of the year when you can't get onto the land, or in the fall when the crops are all in. And and then sugaring time of year, we always spend 4 or 6 weeks in the spring of the year sugaring. So between the 3, but we still do all the same things as far as the milking and the chores and the haying, and we added the sawmill, which we spend quite a lot of time here in the sugaring. Yep.
What's sugaring like?
Sugaring is a lot of fun. It's always fun to start and set up, and but at the end of that 4 or 6 weeks, you're always glad to clean up the stuff and be done with it. This year turned out to be our worst year ever in sugar. We've never recorded anything as little as we made this year, and from what we can understand over the whole state, everybody is looking at about a half a crop from what normal. So it's not going to be a good year as far as sugaring, but when you have a poor year in sugaring, you've got to make it up in milk, or you've got to make it up, saw a little more lumber or something. So you just learn to balance things out. When one's good, the other may not be so good, and vice versa.
Where do you log?
We actually have about 200 acres right here that we log some pine and hemlock on, and then our neighbor up the road lets us cut some logs on his, and other than that, if we need more logs, we actually buy them in from other loggers. But we log right around here on the farm.
Do you sell the logs from here, or do you ship them out to hardware stores?
We actually saw the logs and then just sell the lumber. Like this lumber that's all stacked down here is just for sale to anybody, and we do a lot of what we call custom sawing, where a guy wants to build a barn or a garage and he has his own logs, and so he has a trucker bring in the whole load of logs. They come in one end and go out the other, and we don't have. That's a nice way to do it in a way, because we don't have to worry about the quality of the lumber at all. As far as if it's a bad log, he still gets it, and he just pays us for custom sawing it.
Okay, we're on to work. Did your family always have a farm? Is that always what you guys did?
Yeah, this has been a farm for a long time, and it's what my ancestors have more or less always done.
When you were a kid and you worked on the farm, did you get paid?
Yes, we did. After I got to be about, I'd say, a freshman in high school or something, my dad always paid me money, and then I just saved it and used that to help pay for college. That way, I mean, he could have done it the other way, not paid us anything and then paid for college, but he decided to go ahead and pay us like we were help, and then that way we had some feeling of what it was to have money and to save it and help pay our own college. So that's the way it worked.
Was that your first working job, paying job?
Yes, it probably was. Mm-hmm.
Like, Did you like working on the farm better than the hardware store?
Some of both. I love the hardware store because of meeting lots of people and that kind of thing. But days like today, it was very hard for me to stay inside under a roof all the time. I'm an outdoors person, and that really was hard on me. But I enjoyed many parts of that, and I enjoy a lot of the farming.
How much time of the day? Does farming take up all of your day, all of your time?
Yes, it takes up all the time that we want it to. That's for sure. We managed to get the way the three of us work it in the off season when we're not haying and sugaring. We take one guy handles it on the weekend so the other two can have that weekend off, and we always try to take a couple weeks off in sometime in the year, and those again won't be right in the peak working times. We try to take them in the fall or winter, sometime when things. So there's always plenty to do on the farm, but you just have to say to yourselves, okay, the other two can do it while I go on vacation for a little time. You have to learn to say no once in a while and relax.
Why did you choose to take over the family business?
Well, I think just because it was here, and I enjoyed the outdoor life, and I actually, when I got to UVM up at my college experience, I had started out not really have any idea what I was going to do, and after about my first year, I decided to switch to dairy and agriculture in college, and decided to pursue it that way, and then didn't know at that time whether I would come back to the family farm or end up with some other a career in agriculture. I could have done a lot of things after I got out of there, but I decided to come back here at this point.
So you still like it now?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Okay, we're on to national life. Who was the president when you were born?
Oh boy. I think it was Eisenhower was elected. Dwight Eisenhower, I think, was elected in '52. So I think it would have been Herbert Hoover. I think that sound right? Or Truman? No, Truman. Truman was when I was born. Yeah, Harry Truman was president, I guess, when I was born, and then Eisenhower followed him.
Who did you first vote for president?
That's a good question. Let's see. Just trying to think. When I was a teenager, John Kennedy was president and was assassinated when I was a junior in high school. So I wouldn't have been old enough to vote for him. Maybe. Probably Lyndon Johnson. It was either Johnson or Nixon right after him, right in that era.
Who were Vermont's senators when you were born?
That I couldn't tell you.
What about when you were old enough to vote?
I can still remember Senator Aiken, who was from down in this area, and he was actually a senator in Washington, I think. He had been a governor, and then he went on to Washington as our senator, I believe. And other than that, I really can't remember too much at that point who our senators were.
What national events affected life in Vermont the most?
Well, I'm sure I know that when I was very small that World War II had just sort of ended, and I know that World War II shaped things tremendously here as far as an awful lot of young people had to go off to war, and then it changed. In certain cases, people couldn't even get certain things made of metal or different things because all that stuff was used up for the war. Since then, I think, like I said before, I think the things that have really shaped our destiny, so to speak, has been the computer age in the last 15 or 20 years, and then air and space travel has changed everything a lot.
we're gonna go on to the Great Depression. Or do you have a question?
War.
Oh, okay. War. Who did you know when you went to war? Alright, I will let somebody else go.
Did you know anybody who went to war?
That's what I meant.
Yes, I had, like I say, I was in the service in the Vietnam era, and many friends that were and fellow lieutenants and soldiers who were with me in Texas and Oklahoma actually went to fight in Vietnam, and I don't know as I actually had very many family members that I knew that went, but I had some friends that went over, and I don't know as I had anybody that was very close that was actually killed in Vietnam, but I did know there were some people close around here that were actually lost their lives in Vietnam.
Were they drafted or did they choose to fight in the Vietnam?
I don't know.
Were people's jobs affected during the wars?
I don't think in my lifetime that the wars affected. Like I say, the World War II was just over when I was born, and that did affect a lot of things. That was such a grand scale. But after that, the Vietnam War was more or less considered a conflict. I mean, there were still a lot of people over there, but it wasn't on the scale of a world war, and so I don't think it affected our economy tremendously. It did in some cases because there was, but not to the same extent.
Okay, so this has been our interview with Ralph Coleman. Thanks for letting us interview
Thank you.
Thank
I appreciate it. I enjoyed it.